Hello viewers, thank you for joining me. This show has been on the back burner for a long time, which is probably not such a bad thing given the quality of the reviews I was making when I first found Ghost Hound, but I have finally gotten around to finishing it, and I'm excited to get this review underway. Ghost Hound takes place in the small mountain town of Suiten, and that's as good a place to start as any because this is one of those stories where the location is practically its own character. One of our three main protagonists is a boy named Taro. The Komori family runs the sake brewery, which is the most notable business in Suiten, but that's not why Taro is important. When Taro was 3 years old, he and his sister Mizuka were kidnapped and taken to an old abandoned hospital. Unfortunately, the kidnapper was killed while trying to negotiate a ransom, leaving the police with no way to find the missing children. Eventually, they're given a tip by an old psychic in town, but by the time they find Taro, Mizuka is already dead. This brings us to our second main protagonist, Makoto Ogami. The Ogami family runs a religious sect with a bit of a shady reputation. In the old days, they had a lot of political influence, but things went downhill after the kidnapping, namely because their heir and Makoto's father committed suicide. The Komori and Ogami families are actually some sort of distant relatives, and there's been bad blood between them for a long time. This, of course, only strengthened the rumors that the Ogamis had something to do with the kidnapping, and the most popular theory is that Hideo Ogami killed himself out of guilt. This legacy has led Makoto to grow up pretty much the way you'd expect. He's the school's brooding outcast, and all his classmates are intimidated by him. When he goes to school at all, that is. Ghost Hound is a very psychological show. Taro is still haunted by nightmares of the kidnapping, but his dreams aren't very clear. Most importantly, he can't remember Mizuka's last words to him in the hospital, so he's meeting with a new psychologist after school to try and uncover his memories of the event. They discuss the pros and cons of everything from hypnosis to exposure therapy, and on that note, we're introduced to our third main protagonist. Masayuki Nakajima is the new kid in town. He's loud and cheerful, as well as being rather insensitive and intrusive, too. He's exploring the mysteries of the town, and he brings Taro and Makoto together to explore the abandoned hospital before the rainy season hits. Due to the dam that was built, the place spends half the year flooded, so they won't have too many other chances. Which may be the only reason the other two agree to it, because Masayuki didn't tell the other boys that he was inviting them both. Anyway, this little adventure is what really kickstarts the story, and here's where things start to get a little weird. While looking for the room where Taro and his sister were held prisoner, the three have their first collective out-of-body experience, what will later be referred to as soul traveling, and becomes a pretty common occurrence. This first travel doesn't amount to much, but it gives us a pretty good idea of what exactly is going on with Suiten. The town seems to be a gateway between the visible realm of the living and the hidden realm of spirits. As the series goes on, we see it's not just the three boys. Everyone from the counselor to Taro's mother to just some random kids from their school all see spirits around the town at one point or another. Anyway, Taro, Masayuki, and Makoto end up at a local shrine looking for answers, and here we meet Miyako. The priest's daughter is a spirit medium, but she doesn't seem to have much control over her abilities. There are mediums who just see things that other people can't, and then there are mediums like Miyako who become possessed by spirits, only to wake up later with no memory of the event. And now that the backstory and all the major players have been introduced, here's where things start to get complicated. I wasn't sure how exactly I wanted to make this review because there are too many characters and connections and plot points to ever hope to fit them all together into one straightforward summary. The main thing bringing them all together is the town of Suiten, which is why I said it felt almost like its own character. As the series progresses, we see the spirit world start to get more and more agitated, possibly spurred on by the research being done by Masayuki's father's company. Meanwhile, the Ogami sect tries to use Miyako's abilities to return to power, All of the adults seem to have their own agendas in this whole mess, and in the midst of this, the three boys are still trying to find out what really went on with the kidnapping. I love a good mystery myself, so if you don't want spoilers, I'll leave you here with a recommendation to definitely go check this one out. But if you don't mind a more detailed review, there are a few things I would like to discuss further. Mainly our three leads, because it's a little hard to truly discuss them without spoiling their stories. First is Taro. It took me a little while to really grow attached to him, but I think that's just because Taro is very real. Sure, he's got a traumatic past, but he struck me as being just a regular kid, trying to make sense of his memories, but while going on with his life. Taro is quiet, kind of awkward and not a lot of confidence at first. Even though he's grown up in Suiten, he doesn't seem to have any really close friends until Masayuki moves to town. But he's very kind, too. Early on, there's tension between Taro and Makoto, but he doesn't seem to really hold anything against him. He certainly doesn't blame him for the kidnapping. He doesn't even seem to believe the rumors that the Ogami family was involved. I guess what I eventually found to be really endearing about him was that, while Taro has definitely got his own shit to deal with, he never loses sight of how other people might be hurting, too. So it was really satisfying to see him grow up over the course of the series. He goes from being this awkward, insecure kid trying to make sense of his own past to being someone who's just more comfortable in his own skin, I guess. By the end of the series, it feels totally natural for him to be joking around with his friends, and he becomes someone brave enough to sneak into a religious cult to save a friend. It was a slow start, but Taro really grew on me. I'm not sure I can say the same for Masayuki, but his character is a little more complicated. I mentioned earlier that he could seem insensitive, for the same reason that sometimes his character was a breath of fresh air. He's very open and comfortable talking about his own fears and insecurities, which could seem very admirable. However, he's also very open and comfortable with discussing other people's fears and insecurities, which doesn't tend to make you too many friends. Of course, without Masayuki, there probably wouldn't be a story, because he's the one who brings the other two together. He says he picked Taro and Makoto because all three of them have a burden of some kind, but I don't totally buy that. It's not untrue, but come on, he's a bored city kid researching the town's most publicized tragedy, only to find out two of the people connected to the story are in his class. I'm not saying the friendship isn't genuine later, but early on it feels like he's using Taro and Makoto for amusement. But I did say he was a little more complicated than the other two. Masayuki's trauma is interesting because, unlike Taro and Makoto, he wasn't the victim. In fact, the reason he moved to Suiten in the first place is because back in Tokyo, he bullied this kid until said kid committed suicide by jumping off the roof of the school. Understandably, this has haunted Masayuki and left him with an extreme fear of heights. And I totally get why this would be a traumatic, life-changing event for him, but it's also not the sort of thing that evokes sympathy for him, especially because the change isn't immediate. He actually gets over the fear of heights pretty quickly, but it takes a while for Masayuki to become the sort of person who stands up to bullies, whatever the consequences. I wouldn't say I dislike Masayuki. He did a lot to lighten the mood, and given his own dysfunctional family, he's probably the most interesting to analyze. He's just complicated, and it took a lot longer for me to warm up to him than the other two. Which leaves us with Makoto. He's got the most dramatic storyline, and he grows a lot over the course of the story, too. Ghost Hound had a pretty solid friendship story amidst all the drama and darkness, and the success of that depended on Makoto because he was the only one who was really resistant to it. So it was a little heartwarming to see him go from only agreeing to put up with the other two for as long as the hospital adventure lasts, to being quietly comfortable with just hanging out with them when he's got nothing to do, to being the one openly voicing his concerns that they'll grow apart when they get older. He and Taro actually grow pretty close. Close enough that Makoto moves in with the Komoris when things start to go really downhill with his family. Anyway, I think it's because of his friendship with Taro that he becomes so obsessed with finding out whether his family really was involved in the kidnapping, along with the fact that he was the one to find his father when he killed himself, and his mother moved away soon after, leaving him behind with his crazy grandmother. Yeah, it's not hard to understand why Makoto's still pretty messed up over this, but when he does get his answers, well, it's not exactly the closure he was looking for. The Ogami family was involved, just not exactly the way everyone suspected. Before the Komori tragedy, there was a series of child disappearances, but none of those kids were ever found. There was also suspicion that the kids were being taken for organ trafficking, which is probably why. Anyway, this was back in the Ogami Sect's heyday, when they had all sorts of connections. Makoto's mother tells him that he was the one the kidnapper originally took, but his grandmother, who was also the psychic who would later give the police that tip, was able to convince them that the Komori kids would be worth more. So, in a way, all the rumors were true. It was guilt that led to his father's suicide. Taro and Makoto's fathers were good friends growing up, so the knowledge that he had to sacrifice his friend's daughter to save his son was eventually too much for him. This revelation was a painful sort of irony, but it also led to one of those moments that really made Taro shine, because neither of them take it well, but Taro's main concern is that he knows Makoto is going to take it worse. What can I say? I'm just a sucker for bromance. Anyway, keep in mind that the kidnapping mystery is only one small part of the story. There's so much else going on at this point that I couldn't spoil it all for you even if I wanted to. So to wrap things up, I did watch this one in English. It wasn't a bad dub, though the only performance that stood out to me as being really impressive was Josh Greeley's when Makoto finally confronts his mother. I really liked Clint Bickham as Taro too, though not for the same reasons. Like Taro's character, Taro's voice took a while to grow on me. Taro doesn't sound scripted a lot of the time. He stutters, he mumbles, a lot of the things he says comes out sounding really awkward or like he's unsure of himself, but this goes back to Taro feeling very real. What was kind of painful to listen to early on eventually just felt really fitting for his character. So if you are a person open to watching anime in English, I would say don't give up on the dub too soon. Which leaves us with recommendations. There are shows that I watch and immediately want to share with everyone I know, and then there are shows that I watch and fall in love with, but I can see why they might not appeal to everyone. Ghost Hound falls into the second category. There's so much about this anime that I love. The mystery, the combined psychological and supernatural elements, the friendship story, and an ending that made me feel surprisingly warm and fuzzy inside. But Ghost Hound could also be pretty slow at times, and there was a lot of imagery that was creepy or just plain weird. To give you an idea of what you're in for, a lot of the people who worked on this show were also the people who put together Serial Experiments Lain and Digimon Tamers. So I can see why Ghost Hound might not be for everybody, but if you're even a little interested, I suggest checking it out. Ghost Hound has always felt a little like a hidden gem to me, and I'd love to see it get the love it deserves. Thank you for watching.